The wind had changed before anyone admitted it had. It no longer carried the lazy warmth of engineered sunlight, but something sharper, something that scraped across London's brutalist towers like a warning written in air. 300 years from the age of fossil fuel collapse, Earth no longer orbited the sun it was born with. It circled instead an artificial fusion star suspended in stable orbit, a triumph of nano-engineering and planetary desperation, glowing faintly above the orange-tinted sky. Monica Hale had always preferred the past to the present. At 28, she was already a professor of archaeology in London, known for obsessive enthusiasm for lost civilizations and her strange habit of humming ancient boy band songs while cataloging relics. Her office was stacked with fragments of forgotten worlds, stone tablets, metallic shards, fossilized circuitry, and a framed vintage poster of a long-extinct boy band shared the same shelf with academic journals. She believed history deserved joy, even if it had ended in disaster. At her feet, Noodle shifted gently against the cold draft sneaking beneath the door. The small three-legged dog had been rescued from a failed biolab adoption center, and despite the missing limb, he carried himself like a heroic survivor of some miniature war. The wind outside rattled the window harder than usual. It had been doing that more often lately. The first sign that something was wrong came from a relic recovered beneath the Sahara Restoration Zone. It was a metallic disc etched with orbital schematics so precise they rivaled modern star navigation software. Monica recognized the pattern instantly. It was not ancient astronomy. It was a model of Earth orbiting an artificial star. The disk was dated at least 5,000 years old. She laughed when she first saw it because absurdity was easier than panic. If someone had engineered a star 5,000 years ago, it would mean history had not merely been lost, but deliberately erased. The laughter stopped when she overlaid the relic's orbital cycle with current stellar output logs. The numbers aligned with mathematical cruelty. Every 5,000 years, the artificial star dimmed to near extinction. Outside, the wind howled again. The artificial sun, known globally as Helios Core, had powered Earth since the great atmospheric failure centuries ago. It was humanity's greatest achievement, a fusion construct stabilized by planetary-scale nanofields and monitored by global consensus. It was not supposed to dim. Monica ran the data again, this time with trembling precision. The luminosity drop was subtle but undeniable, a fractional decline masked by seasonal fluctuations. Yet projected forward, the model revealed catastrophic collapse within 18 months. She felt something cold move through her chest. It was not fear of death, but fear of silence. A world without music, without archives, without absurd boy band harmonies echoing through history. She called Dave that night. Dave Warren had once been her high school classmate, a conspiracy theory enthusiast who matured into one of the most capable systems analysts in the Unified Earth Network. He possessed an uncanny ability to connect improbable patterns, fueled equally by caffeine and paranoia. He arrived at her lab with windburn on his face and excitement in his eyes. He believed the world was always on the edge of revelation. When Monica showed him the relic, he did not laugh. He grew very quiet instead. They worked through the night, projecting ancient orbital data against present stellar decline. Each dataset confirmed the same horrifying rhythm. Civilization rises, technology peaks, star dims, collapse follows. 4 complete cycles were etched invisibly into Earth's forgotten strata. Monica imagined entire cities buried beneath deserts, oceans, and forests that had regrown after engineered extinction. Humanity had survived before. It had simply forgotten. The wind intensified over London in the weeks that followed. It rushed through concrete corridors and across elevated sky rails, carrying dust in strange circular patterns that resembled orbital decay spirals. Helios Core dimmed another fraction of a percent. The Global Climate Council dismissed it as calibration drift. Monica knew better. The breakthrough came when she examined microscopic inscriptions along the relic's edge. Nano-etchings encoded instructions not for constructing the star, but for controlling it. There was a fail-safe, and it was intentional. The relic referenced an entity called a stereon. Not a machine, not an AI. and order. Observers of civilization. Monica leaned back in her chair while Noodle rested his head against her knee. The wind outside had become a constant presence, like a breath waiting to finish a sentence. If Asterion existed, then someone alive today knew the truth. Someone knew the star was designed to dim. The realization did not terrify her. It ignited her. For the first time, archaeology was not about the past. It was about stopping the future from repeating it. The wind did not calm after discovery. It sharpened, as if London itself had begun whispering through its concrete ribs. Monica Hale did not sleep much anymore. The knowledge that the artificial star was designed to fail every 5,000 years settled into her mind like a second heartbeat, steady and impossible to ignore. Dave returned 3 days later with something he claimed was either genius or career-ending stupidity. He had accessed archival substrata buried beneath the unified Earth network, fragments of encrypted governance protocols that predated current planetary leadership. The name appeared repeatedly in fragmented metadata. Asterion. It was never listed as a corporation nor as a state authority. It appeared instead in maintenance logs related to Helios core oversight, as if it were both invisible and foundational. Monica stood before a holographic projection of the artificial star rotating above London's skyline. The orange glow was faintly weaker now, though only instruments could prove it. She imagined hands 5,000 years ago programming this dimming sequence, believing themselves guardians rather than executioners. The thought angered her more than the failing light. Noodle barked once at the flickering projection, as if the star were an intruder that could be chased away. The coordinates embedded in the relic pointed not to space, but beneath the city. Industrial London was famous for its brutalist substructures, layers of reinforced concrete vaults originally designed for climate stabilization systems. One such vault had been sealed from public access for generations, officially categorized as structural redundancy. Unofficially, it hummed with power signatures far older than modern infrastructure. They entered at dusk. The cold wind followed them down the stairwell, as if reluctant to remain outside. It whistled through vertical shafts and across angular corridors that resembled a cathedral carved by engineers rather than monks. At the center stood a circular chamber, vast and austere, with a suspended hologram of Helios core rotating in perfect silence. Hooded silhouettes occupied the perimeter, motionless and patient. This was Asterion. They did not resemble villains. They resembled archivists of fate. Monica felt no theatrical malice from them, only a steady conviction that history was a pattern to be maintained. The chamber smelled faintly of ozone and dust, like a forgotten library that happened to control the sun. Paul Hale stepped forward. Monica's older brother had always been steady where she was impulsive. He had pursued systems engineering while she chased ruins, and their sibling rivalry had mellowed into affectionate distance over the years. Seeing him beneath the projection of the artificial star felt like discovering a second past layered beneath her own. Paul did not look ashamed. He looked tired. He explained that Asterion had existed for over 20,000 years, passing knowledge through carefully selected generations. They were not rulers, nor tyrants. They were observers entrusted with maintaining planetary equilibrium. Every 5,000 years, civilization accelerated beyond ecological stability. Resource extraction spiked, biospheres destabilized, and entropy compounded. The failsafe dimmed Helios core, triggering collapse before irreversible planetary death. Humanity survived each reset. Humanity simply forgot. Monica listened without interruption, though her hands trembled against Noodle's fur. The wind roared faintly down the chamber vents, as if the surface world objected to the explanation. She asked the only question that mattered. Why now? Paul gestured toward the projected data stream surrounding Helios core. Technological expansion had reached a threshold. Nano-fabrication capacity, space elevator traffic, atmospheric manipulation projects. The growth curve mirrored that of the previous 4 cycles with unsettling precision. The dimming had begun automatically. Asterion's role was not to initiate the collapse, but to ensure it completed without interference. Dave stared at the projections as if they were a puzzle he refused to accept. He whispered that patterns did not equal inevitability, though no one seemed inclined to debate philosophy in a chamber built to outlast civilizations. Monica looked at her brother instead. She saw not a conspirator, but a man raised to believe restraint was mercy. That frightened her more than cruelty would have. Outside the chamber, another figure waited. Jackson had aged into solemn conviction since their brief and unsuccessful attempt at romance years ago. He now carried himself like a prophet whose faith had finally found evidence. When he learned of Asterian's purpose, he did not recoil. He embraced it. He believed collapse was divine correction, a cleansing wind meant to humble human arrogance. He began organizing followers who called themselves the Fifth Acceptance, arguing that resistance would only deepen suffering. The city above remained unaware of the scale of what had begun. Helios core dimmed another measurable fraction. Crop yields in northern regions declined subtly, masked by reserves. Oceanic thermal gradients shifted by decimals that would soon become degrees. The wind grew colder. Monica stood again beneath the holographic sun, facing Paul not as a sister, but as a scholar confronting doctrine. If Asterian's purpose was preservation, then preservation without memory was failure. 5 cycles of extinction had not taught humanity restraint because no one remembered the lesson. Archaeology was proof of repetition. This time she refused to let the record vanish. Paul's voice wavered for the first time when he admitted something Asterian rarely discussed. There existed an override protocol embedded in the star's nanocore architecture. It required unanimous consent from the Order, and it had never once been used. Monica felt hope ignite like friction against cold air. If the system was designed by humans, then humans could change it. The pattern was not destiny. It was a decision, repeated until mistaken for nature. The wind surged through the chamber one final time before the doors sealed behind them, as if marking the boundary between ignorance and choice. The truth did not explode across the planet. It unfolded like winter. Monica Hale had imagined panic when the data went public, but what followed was quieter and far more unsettling. The revelation that Earth's artificial star, dimmed every 5,000 years, settled into humanity like a distant storm visible on the horizon. Dave released the archaeological proof first. Layered beneath deserts, ice shelves, and oceanic sediment were unmistakable signatures of advanced civilizations predating recorded history. Nanoalloys too refined for primitive societies, orbital debris fossilized in geological strata, collapsed megastructures reclaimed by forest growth. 4 cycles. 4 erasures. 4 forgotten renaissances. The global broadcast that followed did not feature politicians. It featured Monica standing in a wind-battered plaza beneath Helios core's paling glow, holding the ancient metallic disc in her hands like evidence in a trial against time. Her voice did not tremble. Her anger had matured into clarity. She explained the pattern without drama because facts were heavy enough without embellishment. The wind surged across continents that night. From London's brutalist skyline to coastal arcologies in the Pacific, citizens watched orbital simulations of the artificial sun's declining output. The numbers were undeniable now, trending downward with accelerating precision. Helios core had dimmed by 7%. Jackson emerged as a counterpoint to Monica's defiance. Through carefully composed broadcasts, he framed the dimming not as sabotage but as mercy. Humanity, he argued, had reached another unsustainable peak, stretching ecosystems to their limits despite centuries of reform. The Fifth Acceptance gained followers quickly. They gathered in silent assemblies during the cold winds, facing the artificial sun with solemn gratitude, believing collapse to be sacred restraint rather than catastrophe. Monica refused to frame survival as arrogance. She traveled across regions where ecological scars from prior cycles were still visible beneath regrown forests. Entire mountain ranges bore symmetrical excavation marks from civilizations that had harvested too deeply before being silenced by darkness. Survival, she believed, was not defiance of nature. It was partnership with it. The difference was memory. Paul watched the global unrest from within Asterion's subterranean chamber. The Order had not anticipated transparency. For 20,000 years they had relied on ignorance to ensure compliance with the cycle. Now humanity knew the pattern, and knowledge destabilized doctrine. Several members argued that the reset must proceed immediately to prevent technological backlash. Others questioned whether a lesson repeated 5 times without retention could truly be called preservation. Meanwhile, Helios core dimmed again. 12% below baseline. Agricultural zones shifted to emergency spectra. Oceanic desalination facilities increased output. Energy grids recalibrated in anticipation of prolonged reduction. The wind grew colder, no longer metaphorical, but meteorological, as atmospheric temperatures intensified under reduced stellar input. Monica stood beside Noodle on a barren stretch of restored Sahara, where wind turbines now rotated sluggishly beneath the fading orange sky. 5,000 years ago, she realized, another scholar may have stood somewhere similar, understanding too late that their civilization would not survive the coming dimness. The thought did not depress her. It angered her productively. Dave uncovered something within the Helios core maintenance architecture that Asterion had not disclosed publicly. The dimming was automatic, yes, but its progression could be slowed. Not reversed entirely without catastrophic instability, but moderated. The system had a tolerance window. The revelation fractured global discourse. Those aligned with the Fifth Acceptance accused resistance movements of risking planetary biosphere collapse by interfering with a calibrated cycle. They believed nature required periodic correction. Monica argued that nature did not install fusion stars. Humanity had already intervened. The question was not whether to interfere, but how responsibly to do so. Helios core dimmed to 15% below baseline. Glacial melt stabilized in some regions, but crop failures multiplied elsewhere. The planetary system trembled on a threshold between restraint and disaster. For the first time in recorded modern history, humanity was unified not by prosperity, but by shared uncertainty. Paul contacted Monica privately. He confessed that Asterion's override protocol required more than unanimous consent. It required a human conduit, someone genetically keyed to the original architect's lineage, to interface directly with the nanocore control matrix. The lineage ran through their family. Identity was not incidental. It was inheritance. Monica absorbed the revelation without visible shock. Her obsession with lost civilization suddenly felt less accidental. The Hale family had preserved fragments of memory for generations, guiding descendants subtly toward archaeology, engineering, preservation. They had not been chosen by destiny. They had been cultivated by design. The wind tore across the Sahara dunes as Helios core flickered faintly in the afternoon sky. 17% below baseline. The fifth cycle had begun. But for the first time in 20,000 years, humanity was not ignorant of the script it was about to follow. The wind no longer felt like warning. It felt like countdown. Helios core had dimmed past 20%, and the sky carried a muted orange pallor that turned every city into a memory of itself. London's brutalist towers stood like monuments awaiting burial, their concrete faces scoured by relentless cold air. Monica Hale stood once more within Asterion's subterranean chamber, though this time she was not an intruder. She was the variable the system had never anticipated, an heir who refused obedience. The holographic projection of the artificial star flickered above the circular floor. Its glow pulsed unevenly, reflecting instabilities within the fusion matrix that only a handful of people on Earth fully understood. Paul looked older than he had a month ago. Responsibility had carved sharp lines into his expression, and the certainty that once steadied him now wavered under the weight of consequence. He had been raised within Asterion's doctrine, taught that restraint was mercy, and that collapse was compassion disguised as catastrophe. But compassion without consent had begun to look like arrogance. The override protocol required a human interface because the original architects believed responsibility should never be abstract, A machine could dim the sun, but only a person could decide whether to stop it. The genetic key embedded within the Hale lineage was not mystical. It was engineered authentication, passed quietly through generations who were never told why their family guarded ancient records so carefully. Monica absorbed this truth with the steadiness of someone who had already faced extinction in her imagination. She had spent her life studying civilizations that vanished. Now she understood that her fascination had never been accidental, and that history had been preparing her for a choice disguised as inheritance. Jackson's movement had grown powerful. The fifth acceptance filled plazas with silent followers, wrapped in layered coats against the bitter wind. They did not riot or demand power. They simply waited, believing the dimming to be sacred correction rather than preventable design. Their calm frightened governments more than anger would have. Helio's score dropped to 23% below baseline. Oceanic currents destabilized across the equatorial belt. Agricultural production shifted into emergency rationing protocols. The global unity forged over centuries began to strain under scarcity's subtle pressure. The reset was no longer theoretical. Within Asterion, division fractured the order for the first time in recorded memory. Some members insisted the override must never be activated. They argued that 5 cycles proved the system's necessity and that interference risked biospheric collapse beyond recovery. Others began to question whether repeated erasure had achieved wisdom at all. Paul made his decision before announcing it. He accessed the deeper control vault beneath the chamber, a place few within Asterion had entered. Concrete pillars rose like the ribs of an ancient beast, encircling the nanocore interface that linked Earth to its artificial star. The wind roared through ventilation shafts above, as though the planet itself were listening. Monica followed him. Noodle remained close at her side, limping steadily but refusing to fall behind. The small dog's persistence steadied her more than speeches ever could, a reminder that survival was not elegance but stubborn continuation. At the center of the vault, the interface glowed in fractured orange light. Paul explained the final truth. The override would not simply halt the dimming, it would permanently remove Asterion's ability to initiate future resets. Humanity would be entrusted with its own survival without enforced correction. But the nanocore required a biological stabilizer to prevent fusion cascade during reconfiguration. The stabilizer would not survive the process. Monica felt the moral fracture open within her. For weeks, she had wrestled with abstract sacrifice, imagining herself stepping into oblivion to preserve civilization. Now the sacrifice stood before her in the form of her brother, steady and resolved. He had lived his life believing in restraint. Now he chose belief and trust. Julia's core flickered violently, dropping to 26% below baseline. Emergency sirens echoed faintly above ground as energy redistribution systems struggled to compensate. The world did not yet know how close it stood to a reversible decline. But the wind knew. It howled like something ancient and impatient. Paul initiated the override sequence. Security protocols within Asterion attempted to halt him, automated safeguards designed to preserve the cycle. Concrete walls trembled as internal countermeasures activated, sealing exits and rerouting power surges through secondary conduits. For the first time in 20,000 years, the Order's own architecture resisted its guardian. Monica reached the central platform with him. She argued not with logic, but with love, though her voice remained controlled. Sacrifice should not be inherited like genetic code, she insisted. It should be chosen freely. Paul smiled with quiet exhaustion. He had already chosen. The interface erupted in blinding orange light as the nanocore linked directly to his neural pattern. Data cascaded through the chamber in luminous streams, rewriting the dimming algorithm that had governed civilizations for millennia. Above Earth, Helios core trembled in orbit. The fusion instability spiked. Across continents, the artificial sun flickered visibly for the first time in public memory. Citizens looked upward in collective breath as the sky pulsed between dimness and radiance. The fifth acceptance fell silent. Within the vault, The temperature surged beyond human tolerance. Monica shielded Noodle beneath her coat as structural segments collapsed around them. Concrete shattered into dust under stress vibrations traveling down from orbital systems, recalibrating in real time. Paul remained standing within the light. He did not appear afraid. For a man raised to observe humanity from a distance, he finally felt part of it. His final act was not restraint, but faith, trusting that memory would succeed where erasure had failed. The wind screamed through ruptured corridors as the override completed. Helios core stabilized at 20% below baseline. The cascade halted. The reset sequence dissolved into dormant code. When the light faded, Paul was gone. Only residual warmth remained where he had stood, like the echo of a presence unwilling to vanish completely. Monica did not collapse. She stood amid debris and dust, with Noodle pressed against her leg, breathing through grief that felt both intimate and planetary. The wind outside began, slowly, to lose its fury. The cycle had been broken. Now humanity would have to prove it deserved the chance. The wind did not stop all at once. It softened in increments, like a planet learning how to breathe again. Helios core stabilized in orbit, its fusion bands rebalancing under the rewritten algorithm Paul had sealed with his life. It no longer followed the 5,000-year dimming script embedded by ancient architects. For the first time in 20 millennia, the artificial sun belonged fully to the living. Monica Hale stood on the upper observation platform of London's primary atmospheric tower as recovery protocols unfolded across the globe. Emergency grids remained active, agricultural zones recalibrated spectra, and oceanic stabilizers compensated for the weeks of decline. Humanity moved with disciplined urgency rather than panic. They had been warned by history before collapse completed its sentence. The Global Council convened within days, not to conceal truth but to formalize it. Asterion dissolved publicly. Its archives were transferred into open planetary repositories, accessible to every student, engineer, and historian who wished to study the 5 erased cycles. The order that once observed from shadows stepped into daylight, stripped of authority but not of knowledge. Monica insisted on one addition to the public archive. Every artifact recovered from prior civilizations would be preserved in redundant lunar vaults and orbital data rings. Memory would no longer depend on a single generation's humility. For once, archaeology was not about what had been lost. It was about ensuring loss never became policy again. Jackson's 5th acceptance did not vanish. Instead, it evolved. Many of its followers redirected their devotion toward ecological reform, channeling their reverence for balance into measurable restoration projects. They planted forests where extraction scars lingered and advocated for planetary limits, not enforced by catastrophe but chosen collectively. Faith shifted from surrender to stewardship. Helios core gradually increased output, not to former excess, but to a moderated equilibrium calculated through transparent consensus. The lesson of 5 cycles was not abandoned, it was integrated. Technological expansion slowed deliberately. Nano-fabrication quotas aligned with biospheric regeneration metrics. Space elevator traffic continued, but with sustainability embedded in law rather than assumed by optimism. Monica returned often to the Sahara Restoration Zone. The dunes no longer felt like a graveyard of forgotten cities. Wind turbines rotated steadily under a strengthening orange sky, and research teams mapped ancient ruins without fear that their own would soon join them. Noodle trotted beside her, 3 legs moving with determined rhythm, tail cutting arcs through calmer air. Grief arrived unpredictably. Sometimes it struck when Monica reviewed Paul's archived interface logs, tracing the final override sequence he completed. Sometimes it surfaced while sorting mundane relics, reminded that preservation had once meant obedience to collapse. But grief did not paralyze her. It anchored her. A memorial was constructed, not as a statue, but as a data beacon. Orbiting beside Helios core, it transmitted a continuous signal containing the full history of the 5 cycles and the story of the override. It was designed to persist even if humanity one day reached beyond Earth entirely. If future generations ever forgot, the record would not. The wind over London became merely weather again. Children played in plazas without glancing upward in fear of flicker. Farmers recalculated planting seasons with cautious optimism. Engineers recalibrated long-term projects with sustainability constraints built into their foundations. The planet did not return to how it was. It became something wiser. On the anniversary of stabilization, Monica stood on a coastal cliff at dawn. Helios core rose in steady brilliance, its light no longer faltering. The sky held its familiar orange tint, but warmth threaded through it with renewed consistency. Noodle sat beside her, ears lifted toward the quiet horizon. She carried with her a small metallic disc, the relic that had begun everything. Its edged orbit no longer predicted collapse. It had become instead a reminder of what choice looked like when stripped of myth and revealed as code. History had nearly repeated itself. Instead, it had been revised. Monica allowed herself a small private absurdity. Within the new lunar vault, alongside planetary archives and fusion schematics, she had stored restored recordings of ancient boy bands once thought trivial. Civilizations were not defined solely by survival metrics or energy curves. They were defined by harmony, however imperfect. The wind brushed gently across the cliff, no longer sharp enough to wound. 300 years after humanity forged an artificial star, it had finally learned that power without memory invited repetition. Technology and nature were not opposing forces, but partners requiring constant negotiation. Sacrifice had purchased time. Memory would preserve it. Helios core brightened another fraction of a percent as orbital adjustments finalized. The planet warmed slightly, steadily, predictably. There would be future crises, future debates, future mistakes, because humanity was not flawless. But it was no longer ignorant of its own patterns. Monica closed her eyes against the morning light. For the first time since the wind began to change, she felt certainty that the world would not vanish into silence. There would be music, archives, arguments, forests, cities, and foolish songs echoing across centuries yet to come. This time, the sun would remember. And so would they.